I never thought my own stepmother would be the one to destroy my financial life. But that is exactly what happened. My name is Olivia, I'm 40 years old, and my stepmom, Annie, who's 60, took everything from me in the most underhanded way possible. My dad, Justin, is 68, and for most of my life I thought he was a decent man. But when it came to Annie, he turned a blind eye to everything. Growing up, Annie and I never got along. She married my dad when I was in my early teens, and from the beginning she treated me like I was an inconvenience. She would do small things to make my life harder, throwing away things that belonged to me, accidentally ruining my clothes, and making snide remarks about me to my dad. I always felt like she was waiting for me to fail, just so she could gloat. But I never expected her to actively sabotage my life the way she did. I have struggled with mental illness in the past. Depression and anxiety have been battles I have fought for years, and I've always been open about them. It was never something I tried to hide, but I never thought someone would use it against me. That was my biggest mistake, underestimating Annie's cruelty. I don't know exactly when she got her hands on my social security number, but she did. She opened multiple credit lines in my name, racked up debt, and then just let everything spiral. I had no idea any of this was happening until I started getting collection notices for accounts I never opened. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake. I called the credit companies, trying to clear things up, only to find out that I had tens of thousands of dollars in debt under my name. Credit cards, store accounts, even a personal loan. I was completely blindsided. I confronted my dad, hoping he would help me make sense of what was happening. Instead, he brushed me off. He told me I was probably confused and that maybe my mental health was making me paranoid. That was the first time I realized Annie had already gotten to him. She had laid the groundwork before I even knew what was happening. She told my entire family that I was unstable, that I was spiraling, and that I was making up wild accusations because I hated her. And the worst part, they believed her. I tried everything. I filed reports, disputed charges, and even got legal help. But by the time I was able to prove that it was not me, the damage had already been done. My credit was completely ruined. I couldn't get a loan, I couldn't rent a decent place, and I lost out on a job opportunity because of a failed background check. Every aspect of my life was impacted. Meanwhile, Annie continued living her life as if nothing had happened. She had the nerve to act like she was the victim, telling everyone that I was trying to ruin her marriage and that I was always too emotional to be trusted. When I tried reaching out to my dad again, he refused to listen. He said I was obsessed with blaming Annie for my problems and that I needed to take responsibility for my actions. I do not know what lies she told him, but he stood by her completely. Even when I showed him proof, documents, reports, everything, he just shook his head and said I was being dramatic. He acted like I was some stranger off the street instead of his own daughter. It did not stop there. Annie took it further. She spread rumors among extended family, telling them I was out of control, that I was making up conspiracy theories, and that I was lashing out because I couldn't handle life. I lost the support of so many people who once cared about me. They all believed her lies, and suddenly I was the villain in my own story. It felt like I was screaming into the void, and no one wanted to hear me. The financial hit was one thing, but the isolation was worse. I had people cutting me off, refusing to take my calls, treating me like I was dangerous or irrational, all because Annie painted me that way. It was surreal to watch my entire reality shift overnight. I had always thought I could rely on my family, but they turned on me the second it was convenient for them. I had no choice but to start over. I had to rebuild my credit, find a way to move forward without my family, and figure out how to navigate life with the knowledge that the people who were supposed to love me were the ones who had let me down the most. I do not know if I'll ever truly recover from what Annie did. Not just to my fiancés, but to my relationships, my reputation, and my sense of self. I always knew Annie had no remorse for what she did to me, but I never expected her actions to reach this level. After everything she put me through, destroying my credit, making my own family believe I was unstable, leaving me bankrupt, she had the audacity to go even further. I spent years trying to rebuild my life while being completely cut off from my family. No one wanted to hear my side of the story back then. They were all too convinced that I was just a hateful, mentally unstable person who wanted to ruin Annie's life. I stopped trying to prove myself after a while. There was no point. Every attempt was met with more judgment, more whispers about how I was just looking for someone to blame. It was easier to walk away. I focused on repairing my credit, getting back on my feet, and trying to move forward without the weight of my father's betrayal crushing me. It was a long, exhausting process, but I managed. It was not perfect, but I finally reached a place where I felt stable again. Then, out of nowhere, my phone started blowing up with messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. My father, my cousins, even some distant relatives who never cared to check in before. At first I thought it was a mistake. Maybe they meant to contact someone else. But when I read the messages, I realized exactly why they were reaching out. Annie had finally been exposed. It turns out the scam she pulled on me was not just a one-time thing. It was part of a much bigger scheme she had been running for over a decade. She had been opening lines of credit, forging documents, and using the identities of multiple relatives to siphon money. It was not just thousands of dollars, it was over $8 million. $8 million stolen through lies, fraud, and manipulation. She had managed to keep it hidden for years. Some people never even noticed that their finances had been tampered with, because she was smart about it, never taking too much at once. Others assumed it was an issue with their bank or a mistake they had made. No one ever connected the dots until someone finally decided to investigate. That someone was not my father. It was not any of the family members who defended her so passionately when I was the one accusing her. It was a third cousin I barely knew, who happened to work in finance and started noticing strange patterns across different accounts in the family. Once the investigation started, everything unraveled. Fake credit accounts, loans taken out under different names, fraudulent documents. All of it led straight back to Annie. She had been stealing from the people who spent years defending her, the same ones who alienated me for speaking up. Now, with a lawsuit on the horizon, they were all scrambling. Some of them owed money they had no idea about. Others were being dragged into legal trouble because their names were connected to fraudulent activity. And of course, my father was right in the middle of it, desperate to find a way out. That's why they were reaching out to me, not to apologize, not to admit they were wrong, but to ask for help. I ignored the messages at first. It felt good in a way to watch them panic. These were the same people who called me crazy, who said I was just looking for attention, who told me I needed help instead of believing the truth. Now they were the ones dealing with the consequences of Annie's actions, and they expected me to care. But they did not. My father kept calling, leaving voicemails where his voice sounded more exhausted and desperate each time. My cousins sent messages about how they were so sorry for everything but needed my help now more than ever. Some even tried to guilt me, saying that since I had already been through this, I should understand how horrible it was. They wanted me to be on their side, to speak up about how Annie had wronged me so that they could strengthen their case against her. Some of them even suggested that I should join the lawsuit and go after her for what she did to me, as if I hadn't already lost enough time, energy, and peace of mind over this whole mess. For years I had begged them to listen to me. For years I had been the villain in their eyes. Now, when they needed me, they wanted to act like none of that ever happened, like we were family again. I thought about it for a long time. I considered whether it was worth getting involved, whether I should finally get the closure I never got. Maybe it would help me heal, to see Annie finally pay for everything she had done. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that getting involved meant giving them what they wanted. They did not care about me. They just needed me now because it benefited them. I tried to imagine what would happen if the roles were reversed. If Annie had only scammed them and not me, would they have ever reached out? Would they have cared about what she did to me? The answer was obvious. They had years to care and they chose not to. They made their decision when they cut me off and let her walk all over me. Now they were suffering, and for the first time in a long time, they were being forced to see Annie for who she truly was. They were experiencing what I had experienced, only now they did not have the luxury of ignoring it. They wanted my help, my support, my voice, to make their case stronger. But I couldn't bring myself to give it to them. The messages kept coming. My father even left one saying that this could be a chance for us to reconnect, that we could put the past behind us and come together as a family again. That one made me laugh. The past was not something I could just forget. The damage Annie did to me was not something I could just brush off because now it was convenient for them to have me back. I still don't know what I'm going to do. Part of me feels like I should get involved, not for them, but for myself. Maybe joining the lawsuit would give me some sort of closure, some kind of justice that I never got. But another part of me thinks I should let them handle it on their own. They made their choice. They believed Annie. They cut me off. They treated me like the problem. And now that the real problem is finally exposed, they do not get to turn to me for help. Hey ITA, for wanting to refuse to help them. Update 1. I refused to help them. It was a decision that should have been simple, but it still carried a weight I did not expect. After years of being treated like I was the villain, after losing everything because of their blind loyalty to Annie, there was no part of me that felt like stepping in to save them now. They had made their choice when they turned their backs on me. I was simply making mine. So I ignored the calls, the texts, the emails. I left them on read and went on with my life. It did not take long for them to realize I was not going to give them what they wanted. And that's when the real drama started. At first, they tried the guilt trips. My father, Justin, left me a long voicemail, his voice shaking with either desperation or frustration. He told me this was a family matter and that we needed to stick together during hard times. He talked about how he regretted how things went between us, how he wished he had listened to me back then, how maybe we could use this situation to rebuild our relationship. I deleted the voicemail without responding. Then the anger started. My cousins, the same ones who had called me crazy and cut me off all those years ago, suddenly had the nerve to act like I was the selfish one. I started getting messages calling me bitter, vengeful, petty. One of them even had the audacity to say that I was just as bad as Annie for turning my back on them when they needed me. That one actually made me laugh. The group chat I had been kicked out of years ago suddenly came back to life with a flurry of messages about me. I was not in it, but someone sent me screenshots. They were furious that I refused to testify, that I wouldn't give them a statement, that I was not being a team player now that they were the ones suffering. Some of them claimed I was only making things harder for myself, that if Annie got away with it, it would be my fault too. Others just outright insulted me, calling me vindictive, heartless, even delusional. It was almost funny how quickly they shifted from pretending to be sorry to attacking me again. My father tried again, and this time showing up at my house unannounced, when I saw him standing at my doorstep looking exhausted and defeated. I felt nothing. Years ago, I would have jumped at the chance to talk to him, to try to make him see my side, but that part of me was long gone. I opened the door just enough to let him know I was there and then closed it right in his face. After that, things got even worse. Somehow, Annie found out I had refused to help. Maybe my father told her, maybe my cousins did. But the next thing I knew, she was trying to twist the situation again. She started spreading the story that I was the one who turned the family against her, that I was the reason they had all turned on her now, as if I had orchestrated this whole thing, as if I had somehow been plotting for years to take her down. The sheer insanity of it almost made me want to respond, just to tell her that she was completely delusional, but I did not. I kept ignoring them, and they kept getting angrier. At one point, one of my uncles sent me a long email about how I was making a mistake, about how I should let the past go and do what's right. He talked about how much money was on the line. Now, this was not just about family drama, but about real legal consequences that could ruin people's lives. That was the first time I actually felt a bit of satisfaction. Ruin their lives? Annie already ruined mine, and not a single one of them cared back then. Now that they were the ones suffering, suddenly it was real. Suddenly it mattered. The lawsuit moved forward without me, and I sat back and watched it unfold like a soap opera I had no stake in. The numbers kept growing as more and more fraud was uncovered. 8 million became 9 million, then 10. The more they dug, the worse it got. Annie had been living off stolen money for years, bouncing from one identity to another, covering her tracks just well enough to keep it going. And then came the part I had been waiting for. The moment they realized they weren't getting all their money back. Because as it turns out, Annie did not just scam them. She burned through the money. She spent it. Lavish vacations, expensive clothes, luxury cars. She lived the high life, while the people she stole from were left struggling to clean up the mess she made. There was no magic refund, no instant financial recovery. Some of them were going to have to deal with the debt Annie put them in for years. I wish I could say I felt bad for them, but I did not. They had the chance to stop her a decade ago, when I was the one warning them. They had the chance to believe me and to stand by me, to stop this before it spiraled out of control, but they did not. And now they were paying the price. My father kept trying to reach out. His messages went from desperate to frustrated to outright bitter. He told me that I was proving Annie right, that I was showing everyone how full of hate I was, that if I ever wanted a relationship with him again, I needed to rethink my choices. I ignored him. Then came the social media posts. One of my cousins, who had been one of the loudest voices calling me crazy years ago, posted a long, dramatic rant about family betrayal. She never mentioned me by name, but it was obvious who she was talking about. She wrote about how some people hold grudges to the grave, and how no matter how much you apologize, some people just love to see others suffer. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The thing was, their apologies had never been real. They had never been about actually making things right with me. They had only come because they needed me, and when I refused, their true colors showed all over again. Weeks passed, and the messages slowed down, the anger fizzled out, replaced by silence. I knew they had moved on to focusing on their own problems, trying to clean up the mess Annie left behind. And I moved on too. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. I was not carrying their judgment anymore. I was not weighed down by the need to make them see the truth. They had finally seen it for themselves, and it destroyed them. I did not need their validation. I did not need their apologies. I had spent years fighting for my life while they stood by and watched. Now they could fight for theirs without me. Update 2. Annie tried to reach out to me. I was not surprised. After everything that happened, it was only a matter of time before she found a way to insert herself back into my life. The lawsuit was destroying her, and she must have been running out of options. She had spent decades manipulating people, twisting stories, making herself the victim, so of course she thought she could do the same thing to me. It started small, an unknown number, calling me late at night, and then another, then another. I ignored them all, assuming it was my father or one of my cousins trying to convince me to change my mind. Then I got an email. At first, I didn't even open it, but curiosity got the better of me. The subject line alone was enough to make my stomach turn. She wrote about how she was suffering, how she had been abandoned, how she had been wronged. She made herself sound like the victim, as if she was not the one who had stolen millions of dollars, as if she hadn't destroyed lives, as if she hadn't spent years weaponizing my own family against me. She claimed she had no one, that she was facing unfair accusations, that she just needed help, and she wanted it from me. I deleted the email without responding. Somehow, my refusal to acknowledge her must have gotten back to my other relatives because suddenly they were getting involved. I started getting messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Some of them were demanding, others were begging. Some wanted to convince me that Annie was not as bad as she seemed, that she was just desperate and scared. Others tried to shame me, saying that no matter what had happened in the past, family was family. They did not seem to realize how ridiculous they sounded. For years, they had been perfectly fine watching me struggle, cutting me off, ignoring the damage Annie had done to my life. But now that she needed something, now it was suddenly my responsibility to care. Then came the real escalation. I do not know how Annie did it, but she managed to manipulate some of them into believing that I was the reason she was in this situation, that I had pushed for the lawsuit, that I was punishing her out of spite, that if I really wanted to, I could fix things for her. It did not even make sense. I was not the one she stole from. I was not the one pressing charges, but they wanted someone to blame. And since they couldn't get to Annie directly, they turned on me instead. The messages became more aggressive. Someone left a voicemail telling me I was being cruel, that my selfishness was the reason the family was falling apart. A few of them tried to paint me as bitter and vindictive, as if I was the one who had spent years lying, stealing, and ruining lives. My father, who had spent all this time ignoring the damage Annie did to me, now had the audacity to tell people that I was being too harsh. Then someone showed up at my door. It was one of my older cousins. I hadn't seen her in years, but I knew why she was there the second I saw her standing on my porch, arms crossed, looking angry. I did not let her in. I did not even let her get more than a few words in before I shut the door in her face. I could hear her shouting through the door, calling me cold, telling me that I would regret this. It took everything in me not to laugh. Regret what? Protecting myself? Refusing to be manipulated again? The situation kept spiraling. Annie, in one last desperate attempt, must have decided that if she couldn't get to me directly, she could get to me publicly. I do not know how, but she got someone to start posting about me on social media. It started with vague posts about forgiveness and family betrayal. But then it escalated. They started outright saying that I was trying to ruin Annie's life, that I was lying about the past, that I had always been full of hate, and that this was just me being spiteful for no reason. It was almost surreal watching it unfold. It was the same playbook they had used years ago when they first turned against me. The same gaslighting, the same manipulation, the same ridiculous attempts to rewrite history. The only difference was, this time, I did not care. They could say whatever they wanted. They could scream and cry and throw tantrums. None of it would change the truth. None of it would change what Annie had done. And I was not going to save her from it. At some point, I realized they weren't just mad at me for refusing to help. They were afraid. Because if Annie went down, she was not going alone. She had dragged so many people into her schemes, whether directly or indirectly, and now that everything was collapsing, they were scrambling. Maybe some of them had knowingly benefited from her scams. Maybe others had suspicions but turned a blind eye. Either way, they were terrified of what would come out next. I was not going to save them either. Annie kept trying, more emails, more calls from unknown numbers. She was running out of people to manipulate, and I think she knew it. She had always managed to talk her way out of trouble before, but this time it was different. This time there was no escaping what she had done. I waited for her to give up, but she never did. She kept pushing, kept pulling every string she could, and my so-called family kept making it worse, attacking me in every way they could think of. But I never responded, and I never will. Update 3. I thought it was over. Annie had finally backed off. The messages stopped. The unknown numbers went silent, and the family, though still filled with resentment, had seemingly turned their energy elsewhere. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Then my father showed up at my door. I hadn't seen him in years, not since the last time he made it clear that Annie mattered more to him than I ever did. Seeing him standing there looking older, more exhausted, something inside me twisted. But I did not feel any guilt. I did not feel regret. I just felt done. He didn't ask to come in. Maybe he knew I wouldn't let him in. Instead, he stood there staring at me like he was expecting something. Pity? Sympathy? Maybe even an apology. I did not give him any of those things. He started talking and I let him. He did not defend Annie, not this time. That ship had sailed. Her downfall was inevitable, and even he couldn't pretend otherwise anymore. The lawsuit had turned into something much bigger than any of them had expected. More victims had come forward, and the financial damage was even worse than originally thought. The number was now closer to $10 million, and the authorities were taking it seriously. Annie was facing a long prison sentence, and my father was panicking. Not because he cared about justice, not because he felt bad for the people she had scammed. He was panicking because Annie had started talking. She was desperate, and when people like her get desperate, they do anything to save themselves. She was not just admitting to what she did, she was naming names. People who had helped her, people who had benefited from her crimes, people who had turned a blind eye when they should have stopped her. And my father was on that list. I was not shocked, not even a little. I had always suspected he was not just a bystander. Maybe he had orchestrated the whole thing. But he knew more than he ever admitted. Maybe he enjoyed the lifestyle she provided. Maybe he was too much of a coward to speak up. Either way, now that Annie was dragging him down with her, he was terrified. He wanted my help. I almost laughed. Help? After everything? He started saying things that I'm sure he rehearsed. That he was tricked. That he was just as much a victim as everyone else. That if I really cared about him, I wouldn't let him suffer for someone else's crimes. I did not even need to respond. He must have seen it on my face, because his expression changed. The desperation turned to anger, the same anger I had seen when I was younger, when he first chose Annie over me, when he first dismissed my pain like it was nothing. He started blaming me. If I had just forgiven her, if I had just let the past go, then none of this would have happened. He acted like I had set this whole thing into motion, like I had forced Annie to steal, to lie, to scam innocent people. He was unraveling in front of me, shifting between emotions like a drowning man grasping at anything to keep himself afloat. His voice wavered between pleading and demanding, but it was all the same to me. It was manipulation, it was desperation. It was the same cycle that had played out my entire life. Only now, he was the one drowning and I was not going to save him. I let him talk. I let him get it all out. Then I closed the door in his face. I did not watch him leave. I did not need to. I knew this was the last time I would ever see him. I should have felt something. Grief, sadness, maybe even relief. But in that moment, I just felt free. Later that night, I sat alone processing everything. The weight of it all, the finality. It was not just about the situation. It was about all the years before it. The times I had begged him to see me, to love me, to choose me, and he never did. He never would. But it didn't matter anymore because I was not waiting for him to. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.